I love 3D animation. Some of the most visually impressive art that we'll ever see in our lifetimes are CG animated. Seeing the medium evolve stylistically with bangers like Arcane, Spider-Verse, and Intergalactic is a sight to behold. And it makes me really grateful with how far we've come from the days of Reboot or whatever the hell Ugly Martians was.
She is very gorgeous to me!
Yet, something doesn't sit right with me amongst all this CG glaze. And that's the fact that, with practically every American animation studio going all in on 3D, 2D animation has been left in the dust. Nowadays, you will almost never see a major studio make an animated movie that happens to be 2D. And even when they do, they won't release it or sabotage it so it releases in some places across the globe way before everyone else gets it, so that anyone who would be interested in seeing it will be tempted to sell the 7 Cs instead. It feels like we're never going to see the likes of Disney or Dreamworks indulge in 2D ever again, which is a shame because even with all the strengths of 3D animation, there's just nothing like seeing 2D on the big screen. So today, I want to explore why 2D animated films practically died over here in the West, and make an argument for why they need to make a comeback. Strap in, because we're gonna yap about the good old days. Real quick, I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard, but over the past week, LA has been dealing with some terrible wildfires and a lot of people have lost their homes, and sadly, this includes a lot of people in the animation industry. A lot of people in LA are not rich, especially those working in the entertainment industry. A lot of people are working just to get by, and now a lot of people have lost everything. A lot of people have nothing. All they have to rely on is the community. So I just wanted to link a list of GoFundMes and just ways to support people affected by the wildfires. It'll be in the description and pinned comment. I hope you check it out and support it if you can. What's happening is just heartbreaking to witness, especially as someone who lives in LA County and thankfully has not been affected by the wildfires, at least as of right now. The worst I've gotten is like really bad air quality, but it still really sucks and I want to do what I can. So thank y'all for your time. So the best place to start would be with the age-old question, why did 2D die in the first place? A commonly accepted answer throughout the years is that 3D was cheaper and less labor-intensive than 2D, which at face value makes a lot of sense. Traditional 2D is a craft that requires countless hours of work as you're drawing frame by frame. So if a sequence needs to be reworked or outright replaced, the artists have to start that scene over from scratch, as opposed to 3D animation, which already has character models and other assets on deck. So changing a scene or going with a new one should be a lot faster, right? I mean, the pause gave it away, but the answer is no. I don't think enough people realize that 3D animation is actually pretty damn hard. A lot more animators show how the sausage is made nowadays, and it is insane how often they have to break models and manipulate the camera to pull off something that would have been easier, or at least straightforward, if it was 2D. Things like really good character acting and top-tier action are no cakewalk just because they're working with CG. If anything, they're a little harder to pull off as CG already has to avoid feeling uncanny. Making the stuff look natural yet satisfying is truly an art form in its own right. Also, not to mention that if something gets changed in an animated film, 2D or 3D, storyboard artists and other crewmates are gonna have to hop back in the dungeon regardless. So the idea that one is less labor intensive or cheaper to produce than the other is laughable, especially when we're talking about theatrical films that studios want to have as much sauce as possible. Don't just take my word for it, compare the budget between the Disney Renaissance films and their 3D outings from the past 15 years, and you'll see that, even when adjusted for inflation, the 2D flicks didn't cost any more than the 3D ones. In fact, some of these 3D films are getting noticeably more expensive. Okay, so if going all in on 3D doesn't make theatrical movies any cheaper or easier to make, why did 2D die? Well, the bitter truth is, we let it die. Well, I mean, not me. I was like 5 and picking my nose. But the fact of the matter is, consumers voted with their wallets. Throughout the 2000s, we saw 2D films underperform and struggle to turn a profit, while 3D just kept soaring to new heights. Even films that you could consider a success, like The Emperor's New Groove and Lilo and Stitch, didn't sell nearly as many tickets as Pixar's offerings during this decade. When you look back at this era, the most successful 2D films that made a buttload of money, at least relative to their budget, were The Simpsons movie and the first SpongeBob movie, 2 films based off insanely popular IP. And even then, they felt like exceptions after we had colossal box office fumbles like the Powerpuff Girls movie, though I'm assuming that was an instance where most boys, like me, couldn't muster up the courage to look their parents in the eye and utter the words Puff Girls and movie in rapid succession, unless you wanted to be hit with the words Bible study now. People had an appetite for 3D, and I really think it's for the same reason I was smitten by it as a kid. It was new and exciting! Whether if you were a kid or an adult, you were able to admire the technological advancements even if you didn't necessarily realize it. Obviously, you weren't like 6 and thinking,
Toy Story does a great job showing off the visual capabilities of Wonder Man.
You just thought it looked cool. The quality of these films were leagues above the average video game or, I don't know, roly-poly-oly. And unless you wanted to wait a year to own it on DVD like a chump, the only place you could watch them was on the big screen, allowing yourself to be fully immersed and absorb every detail. The nail in the coffin for theatrical 2D was definitely Disney turning their back on it. The Princess and the Frog's performance was weak compared to Bold and Tangled, which were released before and after. And it's no secret that the 2011 Winnie the Pooh didn't make any waves either, but let's be honest, no shade to Pooh Bear, but Disney definitely already wanted to pivot fully into 3D if they were staking it all on Winnie the goddamn Pooh in the 2010s. The most cultural relevance it had by then was holding Kuraga hostage in Kingdom Hearts 2. Nowadays, it's pretty obvious that American studios are afraid of touching 2D and will try to avoid it at all costs. In fact, they seem embarrassed by 2D. The Bob's Burgers movie could have been huge given its massive following, but it seemed like 20th Century had no confidence in it, doing the bare minimum in marketing, and as a result, it didn't even make its relatively low budget back. Sony had a brand new R-rated 2D comedy from the legend Genndy Tartakovsky called Fixed, set to be distributed by Warner Bros. It's Warner. You already know where this is going. That movie is not coming out anymore. They're currently shopping it around other studios, but between the bias studios have against 2D, and this being a film about a dog who doesn't want his balls chopped off, something tells me the odds of release are slim. The Day the Earth Blew Up, a Looney Tunes movie, is supposed to be the character's big return to the silver screen, as long as you ignore this. But of course, they gotta dick around with the distribution, releasing it in the US this upcoming February, when it was supposed to be released in 2024. But it already dropped in places like Germany and Switzerland, with digital copies already floating around, so oops! If you live in America, try to support it when it heads to theaters because Warner sure as hell won't. Disney's Wish was initially envisioned as the studio's big return to 2D in commemoration of its 100th anniversary, but they ended up folding and went with 3D, incorporating a filter that was meant to give it a bit of a cel-shaded storybook vibe. I don't think it looks good. And executive producer Jennifer Lee gave the flimsiest excuse for the switch up, claiming that 2D had too many limitations in terms of camera movement and characterization. What happens in hand-drawn is that you have the incredible hand of the artist, but also limitations in what you could do on screen. What happened in CG is you'd have incredible boundless opportunities visually that elevated it, even to the point for some, into realism, which is not what we wanted to do. The more important thing to us was to have a way to find technology that can do everything, connect to the true vision of the artist, but bring in technology that could finally take away limitations. Alright guys, now I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. You can use 3D elements with 2D animation to help pull off things like more complex camera movements. You guys wanna know a studio that's done that plenty of times? Walt Disney Animation Studios! What are we talking about, dog? I sincerely believe that Disney was just too scared to put out a 2D feature, especially since there hasn't been a massive 2D animated film from an American studio since they tapped out of the game. There's no indication that it would be as successful as a CG film. Any reasoning that's not their bottom dollar is smoke and mirrors that's contradicted by Disney's own past. So if American studios are scared shitless of putting out brand new 2D animated movies, and audiences seem to have turned their backs on them, why am I so adamant that they're worthy of a comeback? And why do I believe that 2D animation is better than 3D? While the first question has a pretty straightforward answer, the second is going to demand some elaboration. I don't think general audiences are against 2D animation, but I do think they became biased towards 3D because up until the late 2000s, 3D was kind of few and far between. A majority of animated films and shows were obviously obviously 2D. So once we were presented with another option, it was hard for consumers to go back. But now the tables have turned. 3D is everywhere, whereas 2D is the rarity. But I do think the lack of 2D animated films has made it more appealing to consumers. It's now a novelty in the same way 3D once was. That's part of why anime films tend to perform well in the US despite having limited releases. Sure, most of those movies are a part of billion-dollar franchises that already have dedicated fan bases who will show up to the theater regardless, but whenever one of these films come over here, I tend to check them out, and after I'll go online to see what people are saying. And every time, without fail, I'll always see a comment that says, "Man, it's great seeing 2D on the big screen." Which to me not only shows that people long for more 2D animated films and have sort of taken it for granted, but also that people see what I see with 2D. The things that make me feel like 2D animation is better. To me, it will always be way more charming and way more impressive to see two-dimensional drawings create the illusion of life and interact in what feels like a three-dimensional space. Not to get all midnight gospel, but at the end of the day, humans are a form of energy, and I truly believe that the most impressive thing a human being can do is put that energy back out into the world by creating something with their own bare hands. That of course includes art, especially art. Whether you're an adult or a kid, your brain recognizes that 2D animation is primarily crafted by someone who picked up a pencil or stylus. There's a human touch that's immediately visible to the audience. And that's not to dismiss the work that goes into sculpting and animating a 3D model. The amount of work it takes to make something like, I don't know, the insane chase scene from Beyond the Spider-Verse. I don't want to deny that CG animation still has a human touch to it. Again, artists put in an ungodly amount of hours to execute their vision. But you'll never be able to take a stack of sticky notes or drawing paper and mimic the look or motion of a Pixar film the same way you could emulate the buttery smooth character acting of something from the Disney Renaissance era. And while that could be spun as a strength of 3D, that it provides something that couldn't be achieved without the involvement of computers at nearly every level, by separating the artist from the pen, it loses a chunk of the human element that makes animation special, in my opinion. Though, I really want to make this clear, that doesn't mean CG is soulless or takes less effort, and obviously the more detailed or stylized a CG film is, the more hands-on artists are going to be. It's not just one animator moving models around in Maya or Blender. Models in motion just don't hit the same to me as drawings in motion. So much about what makes animation great is better amplified through 2D as opposed to 3D for me. I think 2D tends to be much more expressive and does a better job at depicting unique art styles. After all, a lot more CG productions are incorporating 2D elements and techniques for those very reasons. I mean, how strange was it back in the day to see that one Ben 10 movie that was complete CGI, or the Fairly OddParents characters in Jimmy Neutron's world? It just didn't feel right, man. Now we have shows like Fairly OddParents: A New Wish that emulates 2D and tries to incorporate as much of it as possible so that it feels like an evolution of the original series art direction instead of an alternative or replacement. And it goes to show that while you can translate any 3D design into 2D, the opposite is a much taller order. Even then, some designs are just gonna feel a lot more at home in 2D. I also think some feats are more impressive in 2D, especially when it's drawn frame by frame. Something like a rotating shot is almost always going to be more captivating when depicted with 2D characters and the assistance of CG elements as opposed to those done entirely in 3D. Every frame where the camera turns demands a new drawing of whoever or whatever is the focus on screen, alongside tracking everything and everyone around it. Knowing someone drew this with absolute precision and timing is so satisfying. Not to knock the work that's needed to pull this off completely in 3D, but with 3D, it often feels like we end up glazing what the technology can do instead of what the artists themselves did with the aid of that technology. Something else I think 2D excels at over 3D? Action. Don't get me wrong, there's been plenty of 3D set pieces that have me on the edge of my seat, but nothing gets my blood pumping like a well-crafted 2D battle. A great example being a movie that gave me one of my favorite theater experiences of all time, Dragon Ball Super Broly. Seeing this in theaters is a core memory. This film is such a great example of why I love seeing 2D animation being pushed to its absolute limits on the big screen. The first 40 minutes of the movie is charming in its own right. You get some fun shots here and there, and it brought back the vibes of watching DBZ on Toonami with my cousins every day after school, or watching a Kai marathon with them on the weekend. It's cozy. But once they start boxing, they do some absolutely insane shit, seamlessly changing perspectives and making it feel like we're watching some poor camera crew desperately try to keep up with these living fighter jets. There's this part during Vegeta vs. Broly where we're in the sky and we're following Broly trying to subdue Vegeta, only for Vegeta to break free and create some distance between them. So Broly tries to stop him by firing a barrage of Ki Blast, and those are used as a clean transition for the audience to follow Vegeta's perspective, maneuvering around the attack with spins while evading an incoming grab from Broly all at the same time. And despite these being mere drawings moving in rapid succession with elite compositing, watching it felt like I was on a roller coaster. I think the guy next to me found out he's prone to motion sickness that day. It's so smooth yet snappy and has so much more life to it than any fight I've seen in CG. There's also this snippet that's engraved into my memory where, during Goku vs. Broly, a kick from Broly is used to switch into his point of view, giving us a whole 20 seconds where we get to feel like Broly, soaring through the sky as he dodges Goku's blast while firing off his own, closing the gap between them, accumulating in Broly decking Goku in the face, sending him flying through a glacier. It is one of the most immersive scenes I've witnessed on the big screen, period. It did a better job depicting what it's like to be fighting in this world than any of the million Dragon Ball games have. Again, 2D characters interacting in what feels like a three-dimensional environment just hits different, even if the environment is really CG but retains a 2D look. The fact that this movie is 2D, or mostly 2D, helps sell the impact and speed of all of this thanks to techniques like smears and squash and stretch, which obviously can be done in 3D, but are a lot more at home in 2D. Case in point, not only does Broly have some scenes that rely on CG models, and those look pretty, hideous, but the next Dragon Ball film after this, Super Hero, was fully CG. And despite utilizing these techniques, alongside incorporating redraws to better translate the art style into 3D, it just doesn't look as good as Broly, especially in the action department. It's still a gorgeous movie. They're able to take advantage of more dynamic camera movements, but there's not a single sequence where the action has nearly as much of an impact as it does in Broly. The spectacle feels drastically scaled back in a 3D environment. The characters don't feel as loose or speedy as they did in Broly. And while there was a lot of energy in the theater both times I saw this film, once being at the US premiere and the other being at AMC, the crowd wasn't nearly as electric as it was for Broly. With Super Hero, they mainly cheered at the big reveals. With Broly, it felt like I was attending WrestleMania. And I truly think that's largely because it had the power of 2D animation on its side. The return of more 2D films would also allow for more iconic animated series to take a swing at the big screen, taking advantage of a feature-length budget to look better than ever. I know movies based off shows have always had mixed performances in the box office, but I actually think studios should start leaning into these more, given how nowadays fandoms are the backbone of building hype for blockbusters. I mentioned it earlier, but all these years later, I'm still fascinated with the Bob's Burgers movie. Something I was really excited for because it was 2D. The animation quality of the Bob's Burgers movie is on par with the likes of other animated films based on television movies, which is basically the cartoon show versus cartoon movie meme where everyone has shading. Yeah, it's rigged like the main series. They didn't reinvent the animation style from the ground up, but the character acting is dialed up to 11. And Seymour's Bay has never felt more like a real place. Everything you love about the show is here, and it's given the sauce to look better than ever. Seeing Bob's Burgers firing off on all cylinders in a theater full of fans gave me a feeling I've been missing, and it's something I want fans of other animated shows to experience. Throw that Adventure Time movie in theaters. Gravity Falls could probably make a few $100 million. Why make a live-action Invincible when Amazon could just make a big motion picture for the finale? How has Family Guy not gotten a movie yet? A real movie! Steven Universe the movie was almost given a limited release before the Great Lockdown, and as someone who went to the premiere and saw it on the big screen, that is the best way to experience that movie. Thankfully, we might be finally returning to tradition with the Nickelodeon Avatar movies coming out, but I'll touch on that in a second. A huge advantage to 3D animation is detail. Just about everything is insanely detailed and insanely textured. Hair, wardrobes, locations, elements. Scenes will have hella particles just for the vibes. It's super admirable, but it also made me realize another huge strength to 2D: clarity. And that's not to say that 3D is super hard to follow, just that sometimes less is more. For example, take this breathtaking shot from Coco, where Miguel sees the land of the dead for the first time. This blew my mind in theaters, and it's definitely meant to be a flex. Look at what we can do with CG. Look at how pretty and detailed this is. It's still amazing to this day, yet I think think the wow factor has worn off on me. There's so much going on here that you can't appreciate all the details. It's not like the skyline of a city where there's a row of significant identifiable buildings. It's just kind of all over the place. And while that makes sense within the lore, as the world is constantly adding new homes when new souls arrive, I almost wish our first shot of this place was more in line with the concept art that has one mega building at the forefront while the rest are just chilling in the background. With 2D, you can have a lot going on in an environment while still being able to admire the finer details. Take the Cave of Wonders from Aladdin, or Hal Pendragon's bedroom from Howl's Moving Castle, or the Moving Castle itself. Not only can you identify all the little trinkets and doodads, but there's also objects that are animated in different ways and at different speeds. It's so satisfying. While I'll always admire the depth CG provides to its environments, 2D will always impress me as much the fourth time around as it did the first. I think something that really understands the value of clarity in 3D is the underrated masterpiece known as Robot Dreams. One of the best films I watched in 2024. A lonely dog buys a robot best friend, but fate quickly tears them apart, leading to the robot dreaming of the day they can finally reunite. I'm not gonna act like the animation is the craziest thing I've ever seen, but the atmosphere really stood out to me because the artist knew how to capture the hustle and bustle of New York City without it feeling overwhelming. Every single location is filled with so much personality, from the backgrounds to the animals occupying these spaces. Yet nothing ever gets lost in the scene. You can tell apart every citizen, every puzzle and book in Dog's apartment, every photo and poster in the barbershop. The film has a great grasp on visual clarity, and I do think being 2D factors into that heavily. There's one scene in particular that reaffirmed my love for 2D on the big screen. Robot has a dream where he is surrounded by these giant dancing flowers, and it's absolutely mesmerizing. One of these flowers is slightly out of sync. Maybe she missed one of the rehearsals or something. But I love the fact that you can spot that so easily, despite there being so many flowers on screen. And like, bro, this is a dream. They didn't have to get that cute, but they did. Seriously, check out Robot Dreams, y'all. This film slaps, and I'm getting choked up just writing about it. So with all this said, could we reasonably see 2D make a comeback as we enter the back half of the 2020s and approach the 2030s? Well, first things first, obviously 2D theatrical features aren't completely dead in the world. As I've mentioned before in this video, it's alive and well in places like Japan and France. In recent years, we've had awe-inspiring films like Look Back, Chicken for Linda, and Unicorn Wars. But the problem is, a lot of these films produced in countries outside of the USA that aren't attached to a beloved IP or studio tend to get screwed over when it comes to international distribution, getting extremely limited releases that aren't well marketed before getting buried on a streaming service. It's obviously a far cry from how Disney or Dreamworks or Sony can put out an animated film and have it run in a ton of theaters, not just in the US, but all over the world. And as a result, it limits the amount of people who are exposed to these films. Yeah, you can tell someone to branch out and find these stories for themselves, but that doesn't do much for public perception or creating a bigger demand for 2D flicks. My desire to see American studios tap back into the 2D game isn't so I can stay in my comfort zone and only consume American media, an argument that often comes up when people talk about 2D making a comeback. I desire it so that these films can get pushed across the globe and thus see more of them get made. But sadly, I think that a comeback probably can't happen with an original idea, especially since the idea of watching an animated film for their own enjoyment makes anyone over the age of 20 nauseous, because animation is for babies unless it's something I grew up with. If any movie's gonna bring back 2D animation, it likely has to be based off a popular IP while also pushing 2D to new heights. It makes me relentlessly bitter that sequels and reboots tend to run circles around new ideas when it comes to selling tickets, but that's just the reality we currently live in. And that being said, imagine if they made like a Lion King prequel. It's a beloved franchise that Disney is no stranger to milking. We already have sequels, so why not make something that's set prior to the first film? Maybe you can make, I don't know, Mufasa the main character, explore his journey to become a king, and it could symbolize how 2D itself is still the king of animation. With the right execution, it could be a legendary return to theater. What do you mean it's live action? Well, I mean, CGI made to look like live action. Yeah, there's no reason why Mufasa wasn't 2D. Well, I mean, there is a reason. The Lion King 2019 made over $1 billion. But it just doesn't make any sense to me, man. This is Mufasa, this is Scar. Pretty distinct character designs, right? Well, good luck telling them apart now. It's a movie about talking animals. You need them to be as expressive as possible, which obviously can't happen if they're
trying to look like Animal Planet!
This film already has mixed reactions, but I guarantee it would have skewed more positive if they just committed to 2D. Maybe that would have been a turnoff, and obviously it might have sold less tickets, but there's also a chance that people would have been nostalgic for 2D, especially for something like The Lion King, and pulled up to theaters. But instead, we got this visual slop, so Sonic 3 clears. My mega corporation can beat your mega corporation. There was a 2D Lord of the Rings movie that recently bombed at the box office, but to be fair, I don't think it came close to what I'm talking about. The animation looks kinda mid, and I don't think Lord of the Rings was the right property to experiment with if they wanted a massive hit. Luckily, we have those Avatar movies, with the first one set for 2026, animated by the absolute powerhouse that is Flying Bark Productions, revered for their work on Rise of the TMNT, Moon Girl, and Monkey Kid. If this is the kind of animation they're dishing out for TV, I'm dying to see what they'll cook up for a theatrical film. The kind of elevation that 2D needs for people to realize that this has as much merit as 3D. I also think that if more films took a page out of Klaus, incorporating 3D elements and techniques to 2D, just like how the opposite's been done with Spider-Verse and Arcane, more people would be wowed by 2D and fall in love with the medium all over again. While plenty of 2D films still look amazing to this day, I think if Disney just rolled out a new 2D film that didn't look all that visually different from their last endeavor in 2D, general audiences wouldn't be all that impressed or enticed to see it. It has to feel like an upgrade and something that noticeably couldn't be achieved from 3D. I do think the future looks bright for 2D. Hell, my most anticipated movie of the year is definitely Chainsaw Man the movie, Arc. And while my love for the source material is a big reason why, just look at the new trailer, man. It seems like they're trying to draw Denji's hybrid chainsaw form in 2D as much as possible, whereas season 1 alternated between 2D and a CG model quite a bit. This movie looks breathtaking, and I hope it makes a lot of noise all over the world, not just for the banger story, but so that people get a deeper appreciation for 2D on the big screen, causing American studios to re-examine if they should count it out for good. Because let's face it, the more headlines the anime films make, the better they sell at the American box office, the more American studios are gonna feel left out, feel threatened, and are gonna want to get in on it. There's money to be made. I don't want 2D to replace 3D or anything. I just want the two to coexist. Growing up, I said the same thing about my parents though, so it's nice to dream. Alright y'all, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. This video took way longer to get out than I wanted, but that's mostly because I spent the last week panicking, living in a state of limbo as no one knew where the LA fires are going to spread, but thankfully my area currently remains unaffected. That being said, thank you so much for watching. Shout out to Hats Off Media for the thumbnail. He drew this at the end of 2023, that's how long I've been sitting on this video. If you enjoyed it, throw it a like, subscribe, maybe check out Roundtable Rewind, and I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.